It was wonderful.
Okay.
A lot of Haifa is an interesting city from antiquity.
It is. So a spot,
Mhm.
or Safed, as many people call
Yeah.
I show us having 2 minutes before the start, and 12:28, we'll wait a couple more
Yes.
minutes. I know Anna's gonna be joining us, so that'll be nice. The only reason I use this is it's, I can just spread my papers out and all of that, so. We'll start with a little bit of a review of last week, just a little bit, because we really do need to finish the concepts of chosenness today, because there's other topics that we're going to be covering. Next week will be holidays and observances, part 1, and then part 2 will be a study of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, which really focus on repentance and humility before God, and what those 2 holidays represent, what they used to represent, at least biblically, and what they represent today are 2 very different things. So we'll be looking at those things in the next 2, and then we'll look at sort of the history of Judaism, its development. Biblical history will probably be more like part 1, leading up to actually the creation in the state of Israel. There'll be a separate lecture on the Shoah, on the Holocaust, and then we will conclude. We'll conclude. There'll be the state of Israel, the creation of the state of Israel, and what it means today, and then finally a kind of summing up, then there's evaluation forums. I'm just kidding. There's a final exam,
Can I ask you a quick question?
Oh, absolutely, of course.
The Kabbalah? The Kabbalah, is that akin, because I know it's mysticism, is it akin to like tarot cards?
I say that again, I'm sorry. The Kabbalah is
Kind
akin
of
to...
like she said, like the tarot.
Like tarot cards.
No, it's not, I mean,
It's not.
as a
what you're
metaphor,
telling.
it's not a bad metaphor as far as I'm concerned. But it is the Zohar, of which Jewish mysticism is based.
Yes.
Jewish mysticism arose, I think, about the 10th, 11th, and 12th century. It became popular, particularly in the Western European, Ashkenazic, and then Sephardic intersect. And the Zohar is on which Jewish mysticism is based, is a very complex, extremely complex work. In fact, there's a recommendation that you really not study the Zohar until you've mastered the Talmud and are past the age of 40. Jewish mysticism, in terms of rabbinic Judaism, which is what we've descended from, takes a very cautious look at the Kabbalah and Jewish mysticism, in that. But it has become, it has reached some popularity today, a much more watered down version of it, because Zohar, I think, is originally conceived, anticipated that you'd be an already observant, a very observant Jew, and that you would follow Torah, believe in Torah, its divinity as a source. It already assumes that you are an extremely observant Jew, and now the mysticism, the spirituality of it, is what you're now able to do once you've got this very firm educational foundation. Today, there are people that teach Kabbalah, some of them, obviously very qualified, and they will teach it to anyone regardless of their preparation. Madonna being a case in point. Back in the 9th century, 10th century, she would not have been a suitable candidate, to say the least. But then, But I don't, I think for some people, it is a way to, again, it's a path to spirituality. And the path to spirituality in Judaism is not an easy one. It doesn't lend itself to the kind of mystical high or spiritual high easily. Once you're able to access it, it's wonderful, there's no question about it. But to get there requires some effort, it requires some work, some of the barriers of which are Hebrew. Some of the barriers are, it takes, I think, some understanding of the complexity of Torah and some knowledge of that, and observance. The way to Jewish mysticism, Jewish spirituality, often is through ritual, and those rituals can be complicated. You have to learn them, and it's not it's not for everyone. That's my comment on Jewish. I'm not a mystic. I'm not. If you want a foundation in that, there is something that I call like New Age Judaism. It's the Aleph Society, not the Aleph that is based on the study of Talmud. If you Google, but the Aleph Society is a what's it called? Renewal. Jewish renewal has a very strong attempt to renew the traditions through modernizing. So, for example, instead of singing a traditional blessing in Hebrew, they'll recite it in English, and they have very spirited songs. They don't use the traditional melodies. They'll write new songs, and in an attempt to be sort of, New Age feeling, and it's a very interesting. The founders of Jewish renewal was, what was his name? You know who I'm thinking of? What's that?
Something Zalman, something.
Yeah, Zalman Schachter, I think. Yeah, right. Zalman Schachter Aloni, I think is a. What's that? Reb Zalman. Yeah. Now he was Hasidic at one time, and then left.
Kabbalists were big in Sfat. I mean, that's the birthplace of Kabbalah.
Yeah, the birthplace of Kabbalah was Sfat, and I think Joseph Caro was a Kabbalist. Now, Joseph Caro, gosh, I'm way off topic now. Joseph Caro was a very learned, extremely learned scholar, one of the giants. Maybe the Jewish equivalent, the Orthodox equivalent to a Maimonides, and that's pretty high praise. In fact, he wrote a commentary, the Bet Yosef, on the Mishnah Torah. That's no small accomplishment. Then he composed the Shulchan Aruch, which is the arranged table that is still used today by Orthodox. He always separated out his Jewish mysticism from Jewish law and Jewish observance. Those two things were not combined as they are today in practice. Today, you see it more combined in a modernization. Why? Well, because the people who want that experience of Jewish spirituality, they're not going to sit down and for the next 10 years before they get to the Zohar and study Talmud. That's just not going to happen. And study Talmud like all day long and then become observant Jews. We are a quick fix world. We are not unlike all of us, myself included. We're not unlike Veruca Salt in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, where she sings "I Want It Now." We're very, very immediate. As you become a doctor, you're going to see patients who want it now. They're not going to want to, stretch things out 2 or 3 years before they feel better. They want immediate relief. Take it from somebody who's been a patient. So anyway, we're kind of like that. So some of this, of course, is tongue in cheek, but I think it's just a kind of a joking observation. Let us get back now to Yosef Karo did write a massive work called the Shulchan Aruch. Consider it like a PhD dissertation, and there was a corresponding rabbi in the Ashkenazic world, because Yosef Karo, people forget, Yosef Karo was a Sephardic Jew. He was not Ashkenazic. And he wrote it, I think in Sfat, if I'm not mistaken. You would know, yeah, he wrote, but he was a mystic and kept the out of the Shulchan Aruch. You won't find a sentence, a word about Jewish mysticism, and I don't think you will. Anyway, so he's writing this massive work on Jewish law, and there's a corresponding guy, Moses Isserles, out of, I believe, Krakow, old Krakow, Poland, and he's beginning to write something similar, very similar, and he gets a cut, but Yosef Karo finishes first, and his work was so good that Moses Isserles just dropped what he was doing. It's like when you're writing a dissertation halfway through and somebody's already written on the topic and they've written on it so thorough, there's no room for your work. So he decided what he would do is he would intersperse the Ashkenazic tradition into the Sephardic law as written by Joseph Karo, where there was divergence. And he labeled his work Mapa, which is the tablecloth. So the Shulchan Aruch is the arranged table, and with the work of Joseph Karo, and the Mapa, the tablecloth, is Moses Isserles' work. Okay, let's get to the chosen people. And I just want to go over, just very, very briefly, where we concluded with the traditional view of the chosen people. One, there is no reward other than the land of Israel and continuity. In other words, being the chosen people does not result in a higher access to heaven. It doesn't result in a higher access to God. It is a covenantal relationship, and the only reward is that of the land of Israel and continuity, and in some sense, as interpreted by the prophets, God's protection. Okay? Does it imply a kind of superiority or simply a uniqueness? And I would argue that it's more uniqueness and not superiority. Now, there is chosenness in the liturgy. There's two places where chosenness is found. The word God has chosen us appears. At least there may be more, but these are two that stand out. One is the blessing over the Torah. When we take the Torah out, we bless the section. We say a blessing before the section that's read, and then we recite a blessing afterwards. And the blessing, the first blessing, not the second one, goes, blessed, blessed is God who gives blessing. Blessed is God. Blessed is God who blesses Le'olam Va'ed for all eternity. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, ruler of the universe. Asher bachar banu mikol amin, who has chosen us from of all people. V'natan lanu et Torato, and has given us the Torah. Baruch atah Adonai noten Torah. Blessed are you, God, the giver or the one who's giving Torah. Right? So you have this language that says that's where chosenness in liturgy is found. Okay? The chosenness is in the sense of the giving of the Torah. That's what God has chosen us. Now, I think I covered this last week regarding Midrashim, about that there's a counterbalance to this chosenness in many Midrashim. I think I covered that last time. The Torah was offered to all the other peoples, and they rejected it. So in that sense, they were chosen. Not that, and it's in the wilderness, so anybody who wants Torah can have access to Torah. That's why it was given in the wilderness, so that no one could claim it ultimately to be their own. The other place where it's found is, where you say it every Friday.
Oh, the blessing over the wine.
Blessing over the wine. We all sing this part. Also, Anne sings it very beautifully every Friday. It's a beautiful blessing over the wine. It's called Kiddush, sanctification. It follows this very frame, Zecher l'maaseh v'reshit, a remembrance of the works of recreation. And then we say, Kivanu v'acharta, for God you have chosen us. Kivanu v'acharta, Zecher l'maaseh v'kivanu v'acharta, v'yotanu kidashta mikol ha'amim, and has sanctified us, mikol ha'amim, from all the nations. Right? And the Sabbath of your holiness, you have given us for an eternal inheritance. Blessed are you, O God, who sanctifies the Sabbath. So in that, those are two areas for sure where the notion of chosenness is explicit. And I would suggest that the prayers are, those blessings are probably human creations, and reflect a certain emphasis on uniqueness, because Judaism, as I taught earlier, did not go out and seek converts. In fact, it's just the opposite. We don't encourage people to come. We don't witness our faith. We practice it, but we don't witness it so that others can come in. And I think some of that is historical, and I think that some of it is Judaism has always had a partly particular emphasis. There's particularism and universalism in Judaism, whereas I think in Christianity, I'm making a broad generalization, but I think there's more truth than not to it, that Christianity looks to the day when there will be a universalism, where everyone will accept Jesus as the Messiah, as the physical representation of God here on earth, and that one day there will be a second coming, and in that second coming, everyone will recognize Jesus as the Messiah. Now, I'm not saying that's across the board in Christianity, but for a good part of Christianity, I think there are many groups that hope for that. Again, Lucinda and Ashford, you're here, and if I say something that's incorrect, please correct me.
That's pretty close.
Yeah, that's close. Yeah,
And you, when you talked about corporeal and incorporeal, therein's the distinction you talked about.
The corporeal, incorporeal, that is a distinction.
Yes.
So anyway, so that's a quick.
But we will say that we're all God's children.
And in researching the Presbyterian view of the Messianic era, and as Reverend Abel Lamar said, that we're going to leave it to God. The Presbyterian view is we're going to leave it to God to resolve the truth claims. We're not. Our role is not to argue for everyone should become Christians, but we'll leave that to God. And that's a pretty nice view, I think.
It's the only view, I think.
What's that?
That's the only view. Humans tend to think we are gods. And we need to realize that we are God's creation, and it's not us for a final judgment.
That's right. Yeah, I would agree with that. It's not for us. We're going to have our beliefs, and we'll let God, we'll leave it to God to resolve those kinds of disputes. And it's in that. Okay, so I'm going to go on because I don't want to spend more than this session on chosenness. I think that'll be enough for us. So
we won't disagree.
What's that?
We won't disagree though that we believe that the Jews are a chosen people.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch.
I said we Christians will not disagree that we believe that Jews are a chosen people.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, okay. But it should never imply any kind of superiority or triumphalism.
But you come to God in humility, and that's an indicia of chosenness.
Yeah. Thank you. All right, let's go to some contemporary understanding of the chosen people. How do we today, or historically in the Reform movement, view this concept? How do we articulate that? So I'm going to begin with the 1885 Pittsburgh Platform. I would think that some of you have not heard about the Pittsburgh Platform. The Pittsburgh Platform, it's very interesting what Reformed Jews do as an institution or as a movement. Every so often, they feel a need, based on the historical settings, to say what they stand for and to articulate what it is that Reformed Judaism believes at its core. And that's a hard undertaking. That's not as easy as it sounds, and particularly if you have a diverse group and all of that. The conservative movement has done it once, I believe. There's a statement of principles of conservative Jewry, and Orthodox has no need for that. They just have the Torah, they have the Shulchan Aruch, they have the Halakha, and that's what they don't need. They don't need to define who they are or what they believe. They know it, and that's not going to change. So let me go to the, and I shouldn't be so flippant about it. I think, there's probably statements and pronouncements, but, they believe at some level that the Torah is God-given or has divine aspect. The modern Orthodox some of them will accept the documentary hypothesis theory, but they believe in the sanctity of the halakha. Halakha meaning way, but the Jewish way that they practice, Shomer Shabbat, keeping kashrut. These are all things as understood in the Talmud and in the Shulchan Aruch as ordained by God. These are mitzvot, these are commandments. They don't need, in some way, and it's in that spirit that I say they don't have a need to define who they are. They know who they are. It's not changing anytime soon. Okay. So, this is 1885. A bunch of rabbis get together in Pittsburgh. Why Pittsburgh? Why not? Many German Jews came over there's two great waves of immigration. The first one occurs in the latter part or beginning part of the 1800s and takes us up to 1880, where German Jews in particular are coming to the United States. And they do settle, many of them settle along the Ohio River, and I guess Pittsburgh was one area, Cincinnati was another. That's why Cincinnati was the hub of a Reformed Judaism. Okay, so.
They were mostly Ashkenazi?
Yes, yeah, in fact, yeah, I would say almost all were Ashkenazi. The Sephardic Jews didn't really come to the United States en masse like they did, like the Ashkenazic Jews. And German Jews would not define themselves as, quote, Ashkenazic in the traditional sense, Eastern European Jews. We'll cover that when we come to history. Okay. There's a big distinction between German Jews, Western European Jews, and Eastern European Jews. Both are Ashkenazic, but there are dramatic, and we'll see that, dramatic historical differences between the two. Okay, so these bunch of rabbis from the Central Conference of American Rabbis, I don't know if Isaac Mayer Weiss is still alive at that time. He's the founder, really, of Reformed. He was the rabbi who really founded American Reformed Jewry as we know it today. And they get together in Pittsburgh and they adopt a platform, okay? And it's kind of interesting. It's a very interesting platform. You get a sense of the history, you get a sense of what they stood for. And I want to read just an excerpt. We don't have time to go through all of it because they write another platform in 1937 in Columbus, Ohio. They write one in the 1960s, which stands to reason, in San Francisco. And no, it wasn't at Haight-Ashbury, but it was in San Francisco, I think in the 60s. And then the last one was actually in, I believe, 1999, back in Pittsburgh. So you get some ideas, okay? So in 1885, they wrote, what do we stand for? What do we represent? We recognize in Judaism, this is what they write, quote, a progressive religion, ever striving to be in accord with the postulates of reason. Okay? We are convinced of the utmost necessity of preserving the historical identity with our great past. Christianity and Islam, being daughter religions of Judaism, We appreciate their providential mission to aid in the spreading of monotheistic and moral truth. We acknowledge that the spirit of Israel, we acknowledge that the spirit of broad humanity of our age is our ally in the fulfillment of our mission, and therefore we extend the hand of fellowship to all who cooperate with us in the establishment of the reign of truth and righteousness among men. Not a word about the chosen people, you know? Not a word about the Messianic age. Not a word about God, you know? But we are a progressive religion. We are evolving. We are aware of our historical moment as influencing the progress, right, of our religious faith. It's progressive, right? That's the key word. Yes?
That's contemporary with Christian and especially Reformed churches. The motto is always reforming.
Well, in Judaism in 1885, this is, and it has to be in accord with reason.
Yeah.
If you read through the platform, I don't believe there's any mention of Messianism. In fact, there is a rejection of biblical ritual laws, such as the laws of kashrut, because they do not elevate the human spirit. It doesn't accord with the postulates of reason, but were rather practices that were done in ancient times, but do not, because we are a progressive religion, we are not bound by those. To some extent, that remains the case today. Okay? So far so good? Notice the absence of God language, right? There's no...
Did it say monotheistic or something
Mhm.
like that?
They do say monotheism, okay? And there's a kind of equality. The Christianity and Islam, yes, they're the daughter religions of Judaism, but we appreciate, there's a little bit of condescension here, right? We appreciate their providential mission to aid in the spreading of monotheistic and moral truth. Almost like, you know, we're all equal, but we're really kind of not, you know, we were first in line, you know. But in the scheme, what they're trying to do is conform and integrate, and some will argue in retrospect, assimilate into the greater society to which they have been welcomed back in Germany. We'll deal with that in the history part of the presentation. But you can see that the mission is oriented towards monotheism, they don't mention God, and moral truth. Okay. We extend our hand in fellowship. Again, there is an extraordinary absence of the word the chosen people. Not in there at all. And why? Because they don't want, this is my theory, they want to blend in. They don't want to be separate. They don't want to agitate and be in a situation where there could be a basis for anti-Semitism, which there was back in Europe, you know. And tragically,
That's a
What's
basis of fear.
yeah, sure.
Well,
Yeah.
they have experienced so many pogroms.
Mhm. They're very focused on reason, you know, rationality. We are a progressive religion, how do I say it? Ever striving to be in accord with the postulates of reason. Right? Today, that would not be very meaningful, even among Reformed Jews. Now, let me read the 1937 Pittsburgh Platform. In the midst of the rise of fascism, there's Nazism, and there's support for that here in the United States. The more things change, you know, the more they stay the same, right? So this is what they wrote. Very different, actually. We regard it as our historic task, once again the emphasis on history, to cooperate with all men in the establishment of the kingdom of God. Now we have God language. Of universal brotherhood, justice, truth, and peace on earth. Listen to this one. This is our messianic goal. So now we're getting a return, so to speak, of God language. We're getting a return to messianism, right? In 1999, the Reform movement, I'm going back to, I'm jumping ahead a little bit. The Reform movement stated, we affirm that the Jewish people, listen to this, are bound by God, this is 1999, by an eternal covenant as reflected in our varied understandings of creation, revelation, and redemption. We are Israel, a people aspiring to holiness, singled out through our ancient covenant and our unique history among the nations to be witnesses to God's presence. We are linked by that covenant and that history to all Jews in every age and place. We're getting now in 1999, we're getting more particularism, more emphasis on Jewish identity. And that Jewish identity is not reliance back on the 1885 Pittsburgh Platform, it's reliance on traditional Judaism as the source of Reform Judaism in 1999. Now, does anybody know, can anybody think of anything that happened in I don't know, if you get this, you're dismissed from the rest of the lectures if you can get the answer
But
to
I'm
this
not
one.
answering it.
Can anybody guess in the 1990s there was a significant event that happened that I believe and scholars believe prompted this?
Oh.
It's Tiananmen Square.
No, it's not that kind of event.
Prom
In
continent.
1990, there was something called the National Jewish Population Study. And that population study noted the decline of Jews committed to Judaism, and that the rate of assimilation from this study predicted that Judaism would no longer exist in the next 50 years. That Jewish identity, that people who identified themselves as Jewish were not affiliating in the same way that they did with Jewish institutions such as temple. They didn't have any, the rate of intermarriage. And in intermarriage, the rate of affiliation with a Jewish institution of intermarried couples, where one party isn't Jewish, was extremely low. It was either 30% or 12%. It was a very low number. And the sociologists from the study predicted that if this trend continued, the lack of strong Jewish identity, then we would not be around despite whatever population gains are among the Orthodox.
That's just what I was gonna ask you.
Yeah. So that's why, you see, that's why, and you've experienced it here, that's why there's this whole conflict about Hebrew. If you look at the 1999 platform, it mentions Hebrew, whereas in classical Reform Judaism, why? Because Hebrew strengthens Jewish identity. It emphasizes a particular kind of practice. But here, and other major Jewish Reform institutions, prior to that, they were still operating in the 1885, 1937 kind of framework of classical Reform Judaism, where Hebrew was not emphasized and English was emphasized. The services were modeled after a kind of Protestant service. When I used to hear this from my colleagues and hear this, when I go to a Reform service, I feel like I'm in church. And guess what? That's exactly how they want you to feel. That's how they wanted people to feel. And there was nothing wrong with that. I mean, when I go to Government Street or when I go to First Baptist, there is a sense of holiness, there's a sense of awe. That music that they have is beautiful. Now the theology, of course, I mean, I'm not, but the awesomeness of it, the seriousness of it, that's what they were modeling before. And I would dare say that you can't judge that because we weren't in that time. We weren't the leaders of the communities in those times and places. You can't judge that. Those were very different times. Jews wanted, it sounds like an apologetic, but it's not. It's not, but they did not want to go back to the fiddler on the roof kind of lifestyle. And believe me, I've been to Poland, I've been to Eastern Europe 15 times. It's not Fiddler on the Roof. That's just a romanticized version. I've been in those shtetls, and it's not easy. Even today, when you go there, you just, it's hard. And their life was made even much more difficult because of laws and because of anti-Semitism that was ingrained in that culture for long, long periods of time. So I don't blame. I mean, everything in its historical context. Blame, that's not even the right word. But since we live in the United States of America, we have certain freedoms. We don't feel that fear that we want to be part of the country. We don't want to be considered separate and apart. And it's a balancing act. And that's what they were doing in 1937. That's what they were doing you see a lot more security in 1937. You see a lot more of this. And don't forget the times. There's Hitler. Hitler's already in power. He's 1937. The Nuremberg laws have already been written and practiced in 1935. Hitler has been in power since 1933. And everybody's aware of what he stands for.
Well, they've already had Kristallnacht and all that stuff.
Kristallnacht's a year away.
Is it a year away?
Yeah, it's a year
38,
away.
but it was on the way.
Yeah, it's on the way. Yeah, no question. Absolutely. Absolutely. So, again, 1885, society's pretty open. We're going to blend in. 1937, we see a stronger emphasis on particularism. And hey, the assimilation rate is really a problem. And intermarriage is a factor in all of this. And so we're going to return, to our roots. Not return, but we're going to pick that back up. And this prayer book, if you really go through it, it mirrors, to some extent, an Orthodox service. Many of the prayers that are in this prayer book, with some minor alterations, is not dissimilar to that of an Orthodox prayer book. This is a major, major change.
I can tell you that in the services that we attended, it was a blessing to me to hear the Hebrew and then also to be able to read in the book the English what the Hebrew means.
Yeah, it's a very accessible prayer book for that reason. But you can see the shift, and the elderly people of our congregation who I deeply, those are the people I serve, miss, not because they're opposed to Jewish tradition. Their tradition is the Union Reform Prayer Book. And so once a month, we have a service that's dedicated, that prays out of the Union Prayer Book. And it's a classical Reform service.
With the Hebrew?
No, it's not.
Very limited.
Very
Very limited.
That's a smaller one.
We just had one, it was all.
Yeah, we just had one. Last Friday.
We've used that, I think,
Okay.
in one of your services.
Now, let me read to you the conservative pronouncement. It's called Emet ve'emunah, Truth and Emunah's Faith, Statement of Principles of Conservative Judaism. This is out of 1988. I don't think that this is, maybe there's been some amendments, I'm not entirely sure. It's a pamphlet, actually, Whereas the platforms are, like, here's the platform of 1999, it's 2 pages. The Statement of Principles of Conservative Judaism is a little, it's like a, I don't know, maybe 70-page, work. Okay, so they write the following. This is on pages 33 and 34. Few beliefs have been subject to as much misunderstanding as the chosen people doctrine. So they take this head on. They're not, not like us. We're going to kind of. The Torah and the prophets clearly stated that this does not imply any innate Jewish superiority. In the words of Amos, "You alone have I singled out of all the families of the earth. That is why I will call you to account for your iniquities." But it's not just our iniquities that we account for, it's the world's iniquities on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. The Ashamnu is meant, we are guilty, is a universal guilt that is picked up, at least in Reform Judaism, because the entire world is judged. Every creature is judged on Rosh Hashanah, and then the seal takes place on Yom Kippur, and that's why the prayers are so intensified. But there is an extraordinary level of universalism of Yom Kippur. The Torah tells us that we are to be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. And that's true. That's in giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai, God says to the Jewish people, you will be a mamlechet kohanim v'goy kadosh. You will be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation, which with obligations and duties which flowed from our willingness to accept this status. Far from being a license for special privilege, it entailed additional responsibilities not only toward God, but to our fellow human beings. As expressed in the blessing of the reading of the Torah, our people have always felt it privileged to be selected for such purpose. For the modern traditional Jew, the doctrine of the election and the covenant of Israel offers a purpose for Jewish existence which transcends its own self-interest. It suggests that because of our special history and unique heritage, we are in a position to demonstrate that people that take seriously the idea of being covenanted with God can not only thrive in the face of oppression, but can be a source of blessings to its children and its neighbors. It obligates us to build a just and compassionate society throughout the world, especially in 1988, in the land of Israel, where we may teach by example what it means to be a covenant people, a light unto the nations. Current events will be hard for us. It's not easy. There is a conflict. If you're serious about your Judaism and about what Israel is supposed to be, if you're not disturbed, I'm not talking about, I want to be clear, particularly for the people who are online or the people who may view this, that you have to be disturbed, even if you support what is going on, even assuming that you support, the military operations that are going on. Still, there ought to be, at a minimum, a serious reflection and moral consciousness about this in light of what the covenantal relationship implies, at least according to the standards, and they're taking this right out of traditional Judaism, that we are to be a light unto the nation. The first paragraph, the first blessing that precedes the Shema in the morning, Or Chadash al Tzion Ta'ir, a new light shall shine upon Zion. V'niskach Hulana Meherali, or may we quickly delight in its splendor. Baruch atah Hashem yotzei me'orot. Blessed are you, God, who creates the light. Now they're using that, I think, based on the prayer, as a metaphor, meaning a moral light, meaning an ethical light. And that's, I know we're a nation We have to exist among nations. We have people that want to see the annihilation of the Jewish state. And, that has to be reckoned with. There's no question about that. At the same time as a religion that centers itself on morality, there has to be some extended discussion and reflection as on that issue. So you can't have it. You can't have it both ways. As my great teacher would say, the Torah, the Jewish people, it's all one cake. You can't separate out. You can't separate out really the state of Israel from the Torah. You really can't separate those things out. No matter how hard we might try, no matter whether the secular Jews and so forth, it's integrated into the current land and state of Israel. I don't want to get too far. I don't want to get on that subject. I want to talk just about what it means to be chosen, and in the context of the conservative pronouncement, it is it has serious. It's a serious doctrine. Okay. Let me quote Rabbi Norman Lamb. He's no longer alive. He was a leader of modern Orthodox Judaism, one of the modern greats. And he wrote on the subject, "The chosenness of Israel relates exclusively to its spiritual vocation embodied in the Torah. The doctrine, indeed, was announced at Sinai." Rabbi Norman Lamb, Orthodox, Mount Sinai is an event that happened. He's not afraid to use that language of a historical Sinai. At least I don't think so. When it is mentioned in our liturgy, such as the blessing immediately preceding the Shema, it is always related to Torah or mitzvot, commandments. This spiritual vocation consists of two complementary functions, described as Goy Kadosh, that of a holy nation, and Mamlechet Kohanim, that a kingdom of priests. And Rashi, in the 11th century, said everyone. It wasn't meant to mean the Kohanim. The Mamlechet, kingdom of priests, meant everyone was to be a priest, but not in the ritual sense. The first term denotes the development of communal separateness or differences in order to achieve a collective self-transcendence, and the second term implies the obligation of this brotherhood of the spiritual elite toward the rest of mankind. Priesthood is defined by the prophets as fundamentally a teaching vocation. So we are to be a light unto an or lagoyim, a light unto the nations. And you can see that this concept of chosenness has a spiritual and moral aspect to it that is, in the Orthodox, a much more unique expression than you find in conservative, though you do find it in conservative, and certainly more so than what you find in conservative reform. Reform is more, let's work together, but it's moving in the other direction, moving towards a more particular because of the fear of assimilation, whereas conservative and the Orthodox speak more to the theological uniqueness of the chosen people, quick to disclaim it as implying any kind of superiority whatsoever. Okay.
Has the last 25 to 30 years proved that wrong, that they're becoming more Jewish people?
That's a good question. I think the jury is out. I don't know of recent, I should looked up recent studies to see.
Did the Pew study have something to say on that?
Yes, and I'm loath to cite the Pew study because I haven't read it in a while, but the Pew study is very, very disappointing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very in terms of Jews who come and affiliate with a Jewish institution. I maintain that you really can't be Jewish. I mean, you can. I mean, theoretically you can. You have to affiliate in some way with the Jewish institution or with the Jewish people. You can't practice Judaism in isolation. You can, I mean, theoretically, of course you can. But as a matter of practical and developing Jewish identity, you have to support the Jewish people. And the way you support the Jewish people is you support Jewish institutions, you get involved, and you work with other Jews to build Jewish community, to build Jewish life, and to give that life expression in the greater community as well. The source of our strength, just like the source of your strength, is in our temple. I still believe that. I'll put my money anytime on the institution of the temple for Jewish continuity before I will put it on Jewish communal organizations such as Federation. Not that Federation is important, very important, but it's not as important as the temple. I will believe that until the day I am buried in the cemetery.
That's not so different from mainstream Christianity, too.
Mhm.
There's been a fall off there, and even Roman Catholicism. If you read the statistics,
Yeah,
it's
yeah. And
the priesthood of believers is shrinking.
And I think that part of that, and I know I'm worried because this has been recorded and going to be posted, but I think some of it is related to, again, our need to have a quick spiritual fix.
Yeah,
Yeah.
fast food,
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah,
right, drive-through.
Drive-through.
Yeah.
You won't drive through.
You know, the days of a thoughtful, reflective religion that's going to draw people into the church or draw people into the synagogue is, I think, difficult. I feel that I'm out of step. I don't do the things that maybe ought to be done to draw people. You know, and I think
But
that
you're not alone.
we
You're
are
bored.
seeing less and less clergy devoted to serious thought, reflection about the uncertainties of life, the uncertainties of God, the uncertainties of society in this time. We see less of that and more, quick, the kind of quick fix, quick answer. I want to be.
There's so
I
much
wanna be moved.
competition.
Mhm.
The world has changed in such a way, and I see it with the children in
Mhm.
Sunday school when they come.
Yeah,
The competition
yeah.
of, do we go to the basketball game or do we show up at religious school?
Yeah.
And they can't drive themselves.
That's
So
true.
there's a responsibility there too. So it's very difficult.
Yeah,
It's very, very difficult.
And,
yeah. I would agree with that.
and serious.
Completely. We have battled that. And the reason I believe in churches such as Government Street and its pastor, and from my experience at Dartmouth College for 20 years, which it's one of the Ivies, right? You can't take the moral development of the next generation for granted.
No.
You can't just assume because they're smart that they necessarily know how to think ethically and have a sort of self-awareness of their sacred duties to society and the sacred duty to themselves. You have to teach that. You can't not make that part of your curriculum. I believe that to the core, and I see, Ethan, you're more attuned to that than I am. I'm just basing it on my experience at Dartmouth and the students that I saw.
Well, I'm sorry, what's the...
About taking the moral and ethical development of students for granted.
Oh, definitely, yeah, I think that has to be inculcated. I don't think that I
Yeah,
don't think that we necessarily incline towards
yeah,
being
Yeah.
morally good all the
That's why we
time.
need the humanities, you know,
Yeah.
and they shrink.
Well, the one thing that religion is, when you talk about quick fix, if you get into whatever you believe, Jewish, Catholic, Protestant, you need to study, and get
You are right.
involved in the moral, ethical, and spiritual aspects of that religion. You cannot take a quick fix to learn about God.
Right. There is no quick fix to serious, reflective thought about the world.
No.
And it's a question, do you want to get on that path of uncertainty and quest and figuring out, who you are and figuring out the world and that journey and figuring out your relationship to God and how that all creates, and not everybody today, I don't get the sense that that is as valued as it once was. Yes?
I just wanted to add, this word kind of comes up in my head from time to time when this kind of topic comes up, but I feel like a lot of people my age and younger, maybe a little bit older than me, nobody really has a concept of inheritance, like, from a people, no matter what your tradition is, I don't think people view it as like there's a spiritual or cultural or even filial type of inheritance that's not materialistic, and I think that's really unfortunate.
That's good.
Yeah, I think that's, yeah.
A group.
So let me we're gonna run out of time. I just want to conclude this section. I have just some tentative.
I think we should make the class 2 hours.
Not for his help.
Thank you, that's a very wonderful compliment. I appreciate that.
It's
It's very, very
It goes
nice.
way too fast.
It does.
It does.
Well, thank you. So I want to, again, I'm going to come to some tentative conclusions because as a great scholar and a tremendous humanitarian professor at Dartmouth who was really just a wonderful human being, Professor Ehud Ben-Or, when he gave a lecture on reading it was from the Zohar actually, he said, well, this is how I read the text today, but tomorrow I may come up with a completely different reading. So these conclusions may change tomorrow, but these are tentative. This is just my observation. With regard to chosen, in times of anti-Semitism, the idea of chosen people was and can still be used against our people. They think they're special. They think they're, as an anti-Semitic use,
Absolutely.
it's there. It's there to be used. I haven't read the protocols of the elders of Zion recently, but I would imagine that that books, not books, but it's like a pamphlet that have, that are anti-Semitic, probably make reference to that concept, completely misunderstanding how it's to be used, how we understand it. By the way, not all Jewish denominations accept some form of the chosen people. For example, Reconstructionism explicitly rejects the chosen people concept. With regards to how it's understood, you can't ignore the historical settings in which the concept of chosenness was developed. You can't ignore it, especially if you consider the documentary hypothesis as the basis for your religious outlook. As Israel is emerging as a nation and people, and you see it reflected in the conservative and orthodox position, and even to some extent in the 1999 platform, every nation and every people need to have a mission and a purpose unique from other peoples. This notion of transcendence applies not only to one's sense of self, that the need to transcend oneself, to have a higher purpose than just one's own self-interest. A people also need to have a sense of transcendence. And that's, I'll make a political comment right now, is that's kind of the struggle in the United States, if you think about it. We got to put food on the table. I can't meet my bills as they become due. I'm falling further in behind. The ideal of democracy, the ideal of, rule of law and all of that, there's always that struggle. The transcendence of America is that everyone is entitled to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Very, very high transcendent ideals of a nation. And, I'm not, I don't fault people for putting the needs of their family or the needs that they have ahead of that. I mean, it's a balancing act. There's a phrase in the Bible that I'm sure Lucinda and you and Ashford are familiar with, and almost everyone here is familiar. Man does not live by bread alone. That's true. But man can't live without bread. So that has to be, there's a beautiful expression in Pirkei Avot. So I want to be clear that I'm making this comment not as a criticism, but just as an observation. Okay? The Torah support, the Pirkei Avot, the ethics of our fathers support this idea. Ein kamach, ein Torah, and ein Torah, ein kamach. Okay? If there's no, kamach is flour, but really meant in the sense of food in the stomach. If your stomach, if you're starving, you're not going to have Torah. You can't study Torah, you can't be spiritual. It's basically, if you're familiar with Maslow's needs, you can't get to the hierarchy if you're starving. Because your first instinct is to feed. You got to have food in your stomach. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. And if you think of it institutionally, the church institutions that get into trouble usually it's because of economics. It's usually not because they don't get along with each other. It's usually there's some economic basis that's causing them to have conflict. And they become associated with that as opposed to the spiritual mission that they have. But they can't do the spiritual mission if they can't pay their bills. That's part of the... So it doesn't work on an individual level, it works on an institutional level, and as we've seen, it works on a country level as well. And the opposite is true. Ein Torah, ein kamach. If you don't have a sense of transcendence, Torah, with Torah they mean, a sense of developing your moral and ethical development and behavior, all the money in the world, all the bread in the world, you have nothing. The meaning of your sustenance is nothing. And I dare say that when people have too much money, I follow the Robin Williams. Did you ever hear Robin Williams' joke about too much money?
No.
He said that, He said, cocaine is God's way of telling you that you have too much money. And, there's, tragically he took his life. But he had great wisdom in his humor. And I think, too much money can lead to too much. You should have just enough to give to others and enough to support yourself, and the rest of the time devote yourself to your relationship with God and relationship to your loved ones.
Well, it can become an idol. I still say that money has become America's idol.
Yeah.
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 Yes.
Yeah. So, in light of the diaspora, the notion of chosenness has kept us alive as a people despite enormous persecution and suffering that is to be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation regardless. How many wars? The first war in Jewish history that the Jews fought after the destruction of the temple, after the destruction of the Second Temple? Can anybody think of it?
Was it the Bar Kokhba rebellion?
What's that?
Was it the Bar Kokhba rebellion?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite get
That
that.
was the Bar Kokhba rebellion.
I'm not familiar with that. What was that?
The second one,
Bar
the Jews,
What's that?
October.
Oh, the Bar Kokhba, after the Bar Kokhba. That was 137. You're right. Yeah, there was a number.
Yeah,
But they were in the land of Israel.
Okay, oh, so that.
Yeah, the Bar Kokhba rebellion. You're right, the second temple was destroyed, but then in 134, you had the Bar Kokhba rebellion, which was an attempt to overthrow Roman occupation of Israel, but after Israel.
Okay.
1948?
Earlier.
Oh, was it during the First World War?
Mm-mm.
Farther than that, I'm trying to think.
No, later than that.
Later.
The Warsaw Ghetto.
Okay.
The Warsaw Ghetto uprising was, I believe, and I could be wrong off the top of my head, I'll reg a hut on one foot.
It's a long
The
time.
Warsaw Ghetto was the first real Jewish war that was fought.
Yeah, you're
Wow.
right, that was in 44, wasn't it?
Yeah, 43,
It's a
44, that's right.
long
And
time.
and what's his name wrote the books about it,
Yeah, there's a wonderful book if you're interested, Miwa 18
Miller 18, that's
by Leon
Leon
Uris. It's a great book. If you
Yeah, I
haven't
read
read it, I highly recommend it. It's about the Warsaw Ghetto uprising.
And one of the characters.
It's a historical fiction book. It's not really, it's fiction, because Mordechai Analevitz, who was the leader, is in the book. I mean, so it's, yeah.
One of the characters transposes into Exodus, to the Exodus story too. What was his name? Out of that fictional.
Oh, yeah, Exodus,
But-
by Leon Uris, the founding of the state of Israel.
Yeah,
Exodus.
But one of the, Dov Landau fights in Noah 18, and he's a character in Exodus that
Yeah,
Boris carries.
yeah, I think it was played by Paul Newman in the movie.
No, he was played by Sal Mineo.
Oh, Sal Mineo, that's right, Sal Mineo, okay.
Good
Yeah.
movies.
Now we're getting into my field, movies, and that's my real field. Okay, one last thing, and then we really do have to stop. I apologize. My own understanding or meaning is that in our relationship to God and to Torah, we find a certain intimacy in our own particular pathway to God, a pathway unique to those who practice Judaism, but not the only pathway, and that other religious faiths have their own particular mission and relationship to God, so long as our sense of commonality and commitment to universalism remains intact. And so with that, I will conclude today's presentation. Thank you all for coming.
Yeah, I like Leon Uris's books.
Oh, yeah, if you haven't read, you know, I mean, if you haven't read his books,
But
any
Noah
of his
18
books,
was really good.
yeah, they're great. I mean, Miwa 18 in particular is, if you haven't read War and Remembrance by Herman Wouk is another one.
Yeah.
What is it? He wrote another one, something about God. The title is in God. Herman Wouk. Oh, God, what did he write?
I remember.
Anyway, I don't remember the title. I'll get the title for you all next time. Okay, so next time we'll go to Jewish holidays.
Oh,
that
wonderful.
sounds
Yeah.
good.
Okay.
I like holidays.
Me too.
Or, let's see, not the 23rd, but I guess it would be December 1st, which was the Sunday after Thanksgiving.